Hey guys, what's up? Sci here. I am back with another deck tech analysis video. It is early November season, best of one ladder play. I've recently picked up the Enchantress deck and briefly surged into the top 50, only to face the same person three times in a row. White-blue control, kind of a interesting prison mirror, and they got the best of me 2 out of 3 games. But anyways, without further ado, I'm happy to share the list that I've got rolling with, and we'll go over the basics of the deck and the core strategy, just in case there's anyone that's not familiar yet with the deck. And then we'll talk about individual card choices and a little bit of strategy and kind of thoughts behind different matchups and how to approach this archetype. But again, so it's the Enchantress deck. What we're trying to do is use cards like Sithis, Harvest Hand, and Enchantress's Presence to play a lot of enchantments, just generate a ton of value, draw a ton of cards that is triggered on cast, which is excellent. So even if our enchantments are countered, we're still drawing a lot of cards, and which is a great thing against control, especially. It's one way to beat control. If you can land these cards and draw a lot of cards and try to bury them and win the resources race, you'll be doing pretty well. But as you can see, we have no one drops in this list. So I'm actually rolling with a couple Temple of Plenties, which is a great first drop just to help line up your hand in a natural first land drop when we don't have any one casting cost cards. But we've got one copy of Rest in Peace in this deck. You'll notice there's a few one-ofs in this deck that we can go fetch with the Bomb All-Star of a card, Sterling Grove, which is an old classic card, of course. But this is a really interesting and powerful card in this deck. We're giving all of our enchantments Shroud and the ability to, for one colorless, go search up any enchantment in our deck. This card is powerful in that sometimes you're going to want to play this before you even play your Sithis, especially against decks with lots of removal. It may seem a little counterintuitive, but you want to get this in play and just lock out any shock effects on Sithis so that you can get as much value from her as possible, as well as Sanctum Weaver, which is another relatively new card to a historic at least. This is just another absolute bomb in this deck where we can quickly snowball out of control and just generate so much mana. And with all of that mana, our primary strategy for winning will be with Destiny Spinner, which again also has an awesome defensive ability in that it makes all of our creature enchantment spells that we control cannot be countered, which is again great against control. If we can land this early, we're safe to just cast our enchantments without any fear of obnoxious and annoying counter spells that everybody hates. But again, so yeah, this is our primary form of winning. We're going to generate a lot of mana quickly and get lots of activations with this card. For 1 green, 3 colorless, we are turning a land. We're animating one of our lands and giving it huge power and toughness, each equal to the number of enchantments we have in play. So a lot of times when you have Sanctum Weaver, you're going to get multiple activations with this card. And another thing, they do get haste, so you don't need to worry about paying attention to activating a land that you may have just put into play because it gets haste anyways, so no worries there. In our 3-drop area, we've already talked about Enchantress Presence, but more to say on this card. This is just another draw effect, but it's important that it's an enchantment and not a creature. This makes it, generally speaking, a lot more difficult to remove. It just is, you can't shock an enchantment, obviously, so a creature is just a little bit more fragile. So against control, I'm often ditching a Sterling Grove and just fetching this at their end step as soon as possible because it is so important in the matchup. You will get buried if you can't draw as many cards or more than they are, and if they land a Teferi, it's going to be lights out for you. They're just going to bury you in card draw, and we want the opposite to happen. We want to get these cards in play and just start generating value. And also with these enchantment decks, we've got the 9 life Solemnity combo, which is well established and historic. most people, everybody knows how this works by now, but just in case you're new to this, uh, with these two cards in play, 9 lives and Solemnity, we're no longer going to be able to die by general damage. Our opponent is going to have to either use a card to make it so damage can't be prevented for a turn, or they're going to have to kill us with loss of life or some other unconventional win the game outright type of spell. Which, speaking of which, we actually are running one of these ourselves. We're running one copy of Approach of the Second Sun, which is very interesting, powerful card. If we cast this twice, we win the game. Only one copy because we don't want to dilute our deck. We want to saturate as many enchantments in this deck as possible to generate the value, being that it is an enchantment-themed deck. But the one copy of Approach of the Second Sun is very interesting and valuable in certain matchups where, even in the mirror, where you may both establish the lockout 9 lives Solemnity Prison combo, and you need some other way to just win the game. It's always good to have a backup plan. And also, speaking of backup plans, we've got, as I mentioned already, that Destiny Spinner is kind of seen as our primary win condition, but we also can fetch up one copy of Sigil of the Empty Throne, which has been popular in the modern Pillow Fort decks or the other white enchantment prison-based decks in modern. But Sigil of the Empty Throne is another good one to land against control, because every time we cast an enchantment with this in play, regardless if it's countered, we are going to trigger the creation of a 4/4 white angel, and this will get out of hand very quickly. We'll generate mass angels and hopefully be able to roll over our opponent. Lastly, we've also got 2 copies of Leyline of Sanctity, which can be most excellent if we have this in our opening hand in certain matchups where now we have hexproof, so our opponent can't thought seize us. This is great against heavy burn decks. Maybe we haven't established the combo yet, and we're going to die to burn. This can just alleviate all that concern. We've got 2 copies of it. Again, I'm still tweaking, and I've just started exploring this deck, so I may pay attention to my Twitter and subscribe, like this channel. I'm sure I'll have updates as I continue to delve further and study the matchups and just study how this deck ticks. But it's been really powerful so far. I think a lot of people have been sleeping on it. I mean, I know there's tons of videos lurking around YouTube. Everyone's talking about this, and it's nothing new, but I haven't seen it that much on the ladder, which is surprising because I've really started surging with the deck. And at least in best of 1, we can talk about best of 3 in another video and sideboarding strategies. But the other cards I have not mentioned are also extremely important. We've got 2 copies of Borrowed Time and 2 copies of Banishing Light, which is just another spot removal in the form of an enchantment, and it's an exile effect, which is great. We can remove most anything with this card. The reason for the split, in case you're wondering, is whenever you have a card that, multiple cards that are identical, do the exact same thing, it's oftentimes makes sense to split them. It's a marginal, small thing, but there are, of course, a lot of Magic cards that have an effect where they're removing all of one copy of a card in our deck, or they're exiling all one copy. And just for those niche situations, full metagame strategy, big brain, we're just trying to hedge our bet and split them because why wouldn't you? It just makes sense to avoid those situations where our opponent uses one card as a knockout punch and removes all of our Banishing Lights. This is kind of damage control by splitting them up. So oftentimes you'll see high-ranked decks doing that, and just in case you're wondering, that's the reason why. But lastly, the lands, nothing special here. Again, I touched a little bit on the 2 copies of Temple of Plenty, which is a great first land drop, being that, again, we have no 1 casting cost cards. And then I've just got just a suite of the most solid white-green lands, so nothing special there. But another thing about the build that I've opted to go with That's a little bit different from a lot of the other lists I've seen. I'm not convinced initially before I even started playing, when I just looked at this list and tried to, simulate what was going on in my head, how this deck might look on the ladder and in games that you'll see against other archetypes. I didn't really see a strong case for the Wolf Willow Haven, which is the 1 green, 1 colorless enchantment to kind of ramp. It's a enchant land to make your land produce 1 more green. So you can use it kind of as an instant mana ramping effect. However, I don't really see the point of using this card. I think there's way more valuable slots that need to be considered. For example, the Leyline of Sanctities, the Borrowed Times, Banishing Lights. This is so important. Oftentimes in the ladder right now, there's a lot of white-blue decks. Like, for example, the person I played 3 times in a row just a few minutes ago, ranked. I think they're almost in the top 10 by now. They were 11th when I played them, but they were running a white-blue prison deck themselves that's more controlling, a lot more counter magic, but they actually established the Solemnity 9 Lives lockout, and not having these Banishing Lights, Borrowed Times, I never would have won the game. Ended up getting into a weird situation where they established the prison, and I'm fighting to keep them off of Solemnity using Banishing Light to remove that over and over again so that I can eventually get through with lethal with my animated lands. So I don't really see the compelling arguments for Wolf Willow Haven. Let me know in the comments if I'm just completely stupid and maybe I'm missing something, but we are so jammed up in the 2 casting cost slot already that I don't see a lot of room for that card. I don't exactly see how the math adds up. Like, what exactly are we ramping to with that card? I'm not sure why everybody's running why so many lists are running 4 copies of that card, because most often on the second turn we're going to want to lead off with Sterling Grove or Weaver or Sithis Harvest Hand, depending on the matchup, of course, and what you are surmising that your opponent is doing. But again, there's too many spots here, and on the second turn, if you're playing Wolf Willow Haven, and then in the third turn you're thinking, oh, well, maybe then now I have 4 mana so I can play 2 of these things. Well, sure, but on the second turn, if you didn't play Wolf Willow Haven, you could have just already played Sterling Grove. So you always got to be thinking about first, second, third, fourth turns. What is your deck doing? Because this is the most critical time in the match, obviously. But again, guys, there's so much to think about. But all in all, I'm really happy with this deck, how it's performing so far. It's a blast to play. When it goes off, it's just like turbo mode. You're drawing so many cards. It could be easy to deck yourself as well, especially against other prison decks where nobody can seem to kill each other. Oftentimes, that can be one way, kind of your own undoing by just drawing too many cards. So you got to be wary of that. But this deck has a really high skill ceiling. I mean, at its basic core, it can be really simplistic, smooth brain type stuff. You're up against an aggro deck and you just land Solemnity and 9 lives, and maybe they don't. A lot of decks just aren't even prepared to deal with this type of prison lock still in ladder. So these 2 cards just shit on aggro decks, and sometimes the game can be absolutely simple. You just land these and win. That's just a powerful thing to have floating around in your deck to kind of just incidentally land. Super good. But again, you can, like I said, the skill ceiling is really high in that you can get in a lot of situations where you have to calculate, do a lot of math to see how much mana you're going to have, how many activations with Sanctum Weaver, and doing a little bit of basic math to find out how many lands you can animate, see if you can get across for lethal. So it's relatively easy to play, but I think there's just a huge ceiling for expert players to really exploit this deck and take it all the way deep in the ladder, top 10 Mythic type stuff. But anyways, guys, I'm Sci-Hi. I hope you enjoy this little analysis at a deck that's starting to make waves. I think it's getting more respect on the ladder. I sure am enjoying it. Again, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think. We'll probably have a gameplay video up here as soon as I can, but I'm going to have to rest after a pretty good push into the ladder tonight. But anyways, guys, I will talk to you later. Hope you enjoy the deck analysis. Peace.